and the work ahead this job. We passed the American Rescue Plan, as you all remember, back in March to get America back up and running after this pandemic had really pushed just about every community to its breaking point. We got shots in arms and helped small businesses and got kids back in school safely and delivered some really important resources to our local and state governments. And something that was really an important priority for me as we wrote the American Rescue Plan was making sure that our local communities had the flexibility to use this money the way they needed to in order to address local priorities. So I am really overjoyed to hear that Pierce County was able to use American Rescue Plan funds to put $15 million towards broadband. It's 2021, and it's really past time that we think about high-speed internet like we do running water or electricity. And for everyone in Pierce County, a reliable internet connection means being able to get an education or apply for a job or access important benefits like unemployment. And here in Congress, I've been pushing really hard for major investments in broadband since actually before the pandemic, but it wasn't until COVID-19 hit that we got everyone's ears to really perk up on this issue. So I'm really glad we were able to pass the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which now puts us firmly on the path towards universal broadband and helps us cut costs while bridging the digital divide. So the good news is there's actually more help on the way for Pierce County and all parts of Washington State. I have heard so many heartbreaking stories about students driving to a gas station or a truck stop to do their homework. And thanks to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, that is finally going to change. Washington State will actually receive a minimum allocation of $100 million to help provide broadband coverage across our state. And that's estimated to provide access to the at least 241,000 people in our state who currently lack it. Now, that's just what we can expect through the state-based formula for deployment. And this doesn't get talked about too often, but that bill also will help lower prices for internet service by requiring funding recipients to offer a low-cost, affordable plan, by requiring providers themselves to display a broadband nutrition label that will help our families really comparison shop for a better deal, and by boosting competition in areas where existing providers are not providing adequate service. So this is going to be a huge deal for consumers. The White House actually estimates about 1.4 million people, or 19% of everyone living in Washington State, will be eligible for what's called the Affordable Connectivity Benefit. And that is going to build off the first of its kind program that we created last December, the Emergency Broadband Benefit. And that benefit will provide $30 per month to help make sure families in Washington State can get connected to reliable high-speed internet. This is a permanent program that's going to make a real difference. And I am really excited to say the bill also includes my Digital Equity Act. That's legislation I introduced actually back in 2019, which would make sure everyone can make the most of an internet connection once they have it. And it would do that by establishing 2 grant programs to be administered by the federal government. First one establishes a 5-year, $300 million per year formula grant program for all 50 states to fund the creation and implementation of comprehensive digital equity plans. Importantly, my bill also sends resources directly to local communities. And it creates a 5-year, $250 million per year competitive grant program to support digital equity projects that are undertaken by individual groups or coalitions or local governments like Pierce County or the Bethel School District. Now, there's a lot more, of course, to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but I wanted to do this today to get a chance to hear from everyone here on this call about how the American Rescue Plan dollars will be implemented and more about the local challenges that around broadband, so I can make sure that I'm doing everything possible to fight for Pierce County here in the other Washington. So I'm delighted to join with all of you today, and I will turn it over to Derek to begin remarks.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you so much for all your advocacy, throughout your career, but particularly during the pandemic. We've really relied on that. And Pierce County, I think, has tried to implement a lot of the direction that we saw from the federal government, and including in the ARPA, when we first were reading through it, my ears kind of perked up and said, I think they want us to do broadband. And so just to give you a little history before I turn it over to my staff to help talk about what we're actually going to do. A few years ago, we actually, acknowledging the challenges that were around that we could see, decided to conduct a study that I sponsored in order to really put real numbers into contextualize the problem in Pierce County. I was hearing from families whose kids at that time, like you talked about, were going to the local Burger King in order to use their internet at night to do homework. But then when the pandemic hit, ironically, we were completing our plans and beginning to start working on how to do a request for a proposal when it hit. And that's when we really saw the stark reality. Pierce County is a little different than most of Washington counties in that we don't have a public utility district. So we haven't had that public investment. We've relied entirely on investor-owned providers, and that's left big gaps. And so when workers went remote, working from home, or students were suddenly going to school at home, we really had a lot of folks that were in trouble. And particularly even if they are served, which there's large unserved areas, if it's not high quality, high speed broadband, they're left behind because they have too many people trying to use the same connection. And so it really led to some challenges. In the fall of last year, we actually utilized some of our CARES Act funding as well to try to meet the technology needs of our students when schools, we had another wave come and it was clear they weren't going to return to school right away. So we let the school districts come up with their own, needs. Some of them bought hotspots. Some of them bought additional laptops. It just depended on what their school district thought. But we didn't wait for ARPA to begin investing some of those technology challenges. So with that, we're at the point where we've just received a closure of all of our requests for proposal. So we have some next steps. One other thing that I will note here, there's the places where we're going to make some direct investments with our partners, but there's also some cases where we've seen providers react to that investment. And in some of the marginal areas, they've gone ahead and done proposals where they're not going to ask for public investment. So I think in some cases, we spurred additional private investment without any public dollars. I thought that was just a particularly interesting impact from the ARPA expenditure. So with that, I'm going to introduce Hugh Taylor, who is on our council research staff and has been shepherding this project from the beginning.
All right, thank you. So good morning, Senator Murray. Thank you for the opportunity this morning to speak to you about the county's efforts. As Chair Young indicated, Pierce County actually began evaluating a broadband need before the pandemic. The county conducted a study in 2018 and 2019. That was a broadband access evaluation to get a better handle on where the shortcomings exist in the county. Following that evaluation, the county began a strategic planning effort. And that strategic planning effort actually began in February 2020. And of course, roughly a month later, the pandemic was declared, and we all know what happened nationally and globally regarding demand for broadband service. It increased astronomically. And so it was an item that, as we went through our strategic planning process, we were hearing from the community members about the need as families were at home quarantining and students are trying to engage in education, employees trying to interact with their employers, et cetera. So the demand for broadband increased astronomically during the time that we were working on our strategic plan. The purpose of that strategic plan was to better define the geographies where there are shortcomings, to get an understanding of the cost to bring service to those geographies, and then ways to potentially partner to fund that service. As the chair noted, Pierce County is somewhat unique in Washington State in that we are one of few counties that do not have a public utility district. broadband service in the county is primarily provided by the private sector. We have 8 fixed service providers in the county, plus a number of wireless providers. On the surface, you would think having that many providers would actually be an advantage to bringing service, but actually it turns out that it can be a disadvantage because of the areas that where service is lacking. The return on investment for the private sector is very low, and so there isn't an incentive for them to serve those areas. So the opportunity for funding through the federal government to help bring additional funds for infrastructure to improve that return investment on investment is absolutely essential. As the chair noted, the county council has used a portion of the funds from the federal ARPA allocation, specifically $15 million, has set that money aside to help support partnerships. And the approach that the county is taking is a request for proposal process where we put out basically a solicitation to the provider community asking if there would be providers, both private and public sector, that might be interested in partnering with the county to bring service to these unserved or underserved areas. We have received a number of proposals that have come back in response to that RFP. The county is in the process of evaluating those proposals to determine which of the ones that have been received merit further work and engagement. We're hoping that one or more of those proposals will produce fruit and result in service being improved. We're also going to use those partners to pursue grants. And as you noted, Senator, there are other funding opportunities above and beyond ARPA, above and beyond the $15 million that Pierce County has set aside through various state and federal grant programs. We're hoping to leverage the money that we've set aside for ARPA to access some of those additional grants. Because if you look at it from a countywide perspective, Pierce County specifically, the need is greater than the $15 million that's been set aside. Countywide, just to serve the 5 geographies that I mentioned is probably on the neighborhood of $100 million. That doesn't include the ongoing administration costs, operations and maintenance costs. That's just the infrastructure cost. Like many governments, local governments, broadband service isn't part of one of its core programs that it's traditionally provided, so it doesn't have the operational infrastructure in place to operate broadband systems like this. And so partners are key, partnering with experienced providers that have history and have the infrastructure in place, operational infrastructure in place to bring service is essential for the county. And so that's the approach that we're taking. And we're hoping, we're very optimistic that we're going to have some good partners to work with. And we recognize that we're really at the start of it's going to be an extended effort, right? These are multi-year efforts. And so we're hopeful that will result in some good improvements with the federal government's help to the communities of Pierce County. Well, the last thing I'll note is, I've talked about availability. As you noted, Senator, affordability is just as important. And so Pierce County is very thankful to see the funding that the federal government has provided to help with the affordability side. While many of our residents and families don't have good access, many do, but they just can't afford it. And so having that affordability help from the federal government is essential.
Are we able to share that slide? We were running short on time.
Yeah, I didn't want to take up too much time, but Senator, if I could, I can just show a map, like 30 seconds, and just show the 5 geographies, if that would be okay. So let me bring that up.
That'd be great.
Okay, thank you. Share. Okay, does that come up on the screen okay?
It does.
Okay, so what this slide is, of course, is Pierce County, and the areas that are shown they should look pink on your screen are the highest priority unserved areas. And then the areas that show up in crosshatch or other priority unserved or underserved areas. And as I noted, these areas are largely rural. So out on the Key Peninsula that I think Mark Cockerill will speak to in a few minutes, you can see that a lot of that area is not, meets the definition of not being served. And then of course, in around some of our small cities, notably in the north central part of the county, in and around Buckley, Ording, Carbonado, Wilkeson, Bonnie Lake, we have a lot of pockets there, neighborhoods that are primarily served by digital subscriber line, DSL, copper service that don't have good broadband access. And then in the south, in and around Eatonville, Roy, McKenna area, we also have pretty significant shortcomings. And so that's kind of a snapshot countywide of the unserved areas. And then of course, in the cities and the urban areas, while service may exist, there are some affordability issues for certain households and families. So that is a quick snapshot of how Pierce County looks. Thank you.
We appreciate it. And Senator, I will note that there are substantial pockets in the rest of the areas where there is no access to service for folks. So there's still others. So because we also see this not just as an equity issue, but also part of our economic future, I wanted to have our Economic Development Director, Betty Capestany, say a few words.
Sure. Good morning, Senator Murray. We appreciate your leadership on this, and you can see there's a lot of passion from Pierce County. Chair Young's been advocating for this for a long time before the pandemic, and really the pandemic brought a few things to mind and really magnified the need and the impact of the digital divide, but it also showed the value that small businesses bring to the economy and how they are also adversely impacted by the digital divide. So we saw many of our businesses needing to move to online platforms, and the businesses that are in the areas that you saw highlighted don't have that opportunity for access. The county does have other programs that we're looking in addition to this. So if we're able to get some of this broadband infrastructure, we have like innovation grants and those kinds of things for our small businesses then to leverage the platform, then to be able to develop their online carts or whatever they need to be able to be competitive in this new economy. We saw also a lot of the workers are working from home. And if they can't work from home, it's just like the students, or they're all trying to log on and have terrible bandwidth. And so there are lots of issues there, issues of accessing any kind of benefits, whether it's medical benefits, whether it's even how to get your COVID shot. If they couldn't get online, and because everybody went online because you couldn't get in person, we just saw so many issues magnifying in that piece that we really want to make a difference. And we know that it does tie to equity. The areas that you saw are areas that are probably more affordable for people to live, and a lot of young people and families are choosing to be in those communities. So we just want to make sure that we're able to leverage opportunities. Obviously the marketplace, I'm a big marketplace fan, but the marketplace won't pick up the gap. And what Hugh had mentioned as just a brief estimate without counting all the other pieces of that 100 million, it's probably higher than that. So you'll see, even with our 15 million, there's a lot of gap. And so we're just really applaud your efforts here. Any help you can help us with on additional leveraging of those opportunities. And we just want to make sure that with these rescue plan resources, we can really make a difference. And for Pierce County being a large county, a large employer base, we just want to have this work for everyone in our community, and we thank you for that. And I try to go really fast because I know you have a couple other speakers on the line, but be glad to answer any additional questions that you have on the economic benefits.
Thank you, Director Capestany. And I did want to hear from a couple of folks who have on the ground understanding of the problem. Mark Cockerill is on our Key Peninsula Community Council, which is a volunteer organization that does a lot of coordination of efforts for various different, social needs. And Mark took on this project kind of on his own and has really put in a lot of effort. So I wanted to have him say a few words.
Okay, thanks, Derek, and thank you, Senator. Not only for all the work you're doing and bringing the money to the table, but bringing the focus of broadband to people's awareness, because I've found in the 2 years I've been doing this, it's taking on the importance of providing food, shelter, heating. It's the same. It has the same importance, and what you've been saying adds credibility to that. Key Peninsula is almost like an island, okay, surrounded by by water in 3 parts. And we did a survey back in October of last year, and we have areas that are well served, have good internet speed. We have areas that don't have any service, and we have areas that are underserved. And what the survey showed was that over 55% of the people in the Key Peninsula had less than 11 megabytes download, which is less than half of the FDA minimum. So we have people struggling all the time. And one of the stories I heard was a parent who lives in a community, didn't have very good internet. She had actually 2 lines coming into her house, but each line only had 3 megabytes. And she told me this story has just stuck with me. She said every day she had to decide, does she use it for her job, or does she give it to her children? And I came across that all the time in this work that I'm doing. So we're making progress with your help, with Derek's, Hugh's, and Washington State Broadband Office. And we're not alone in this. I want to add on to a comment that Derek made, that we actually are picking up some motion here now in the KP from a provider who's is doing it with their own funds. There's a little island off of Key Peninsula called Heron Island, and there's about 70 or 80 souls on there, and they're on one provider, and it's and they do DSL, so it's not very good. Everybody gets about 3 megabytes. But we talked to this other provider. They got very excited, and they've already done the funding. They're going to do the build out starting next year, or first part of the year. And not only will they get better service, but it's possible that they're going to get fiber optic, okay, which is really pretty good. And then I've identified 2 other areas within the Key Peninsula. They're HOAs, homeowner associations. And you get to what Hugh talked about was that internet providers, they have to make a profit. So the less profit, the less they're inclined. But I found these areas that have 70 to 80 to 90 homes in there, and I've identified to them, and they're getting the funding, and they're doing that on their own. So between Derek, Hugh, you, Washington State Broadband Office, we're making progress, but it's a long road. And it'll probably take us longer to get to those people who are probably most in need, that are the most rural, where they're a couple of miles down the road, okay, and they're a single, house. So it'll be a long slug, a long battle. And the one thing I will quickly add is that although we still have a lot of work to do with that, I'm starting to switch my focus a little bit into education. Not just for kids, okay, because I think a lot of that's being taken care of, but I'm talking about, first of all, adults who kind of missed the computer part of training in life, and that they don't have it's not a level field for them, and they go to apply for jobs, they don't have that kind of training. I won't get into their surveys and research, but it's fascinating. And so I'm trying to use the community organizations we have here in the Key Peninsula to create training programs so people can go and work on a computer and learn how to work with it. And then, of course, the elderly, especially those who maybe they even have internet, but they just don't have the skills. So I'm slowly shifting my focus to that as well. It's one thing to get the other internet, it's another thing to be able to use it. So I feel positive. I thank you for what you've been doing. And you too, Derek.
Thank you, Mark. We appreciate it. And we did want to get to Superintendent Tom Siegel from the Bethel School District. Bethel's one of our largest school districts, but it also serves both urban and rural areas, a lot of kids in need, and wanted to make sure that he was able to talk about the impact of online learning.
Sure. So thank you, Senator, for the opportunity. As mentioned, Bethel is located to the south of Puyallup and to the east of Joint Base Lewis McChord. We have 20,000 students, 120,000 people reside in this area. And we were fortunate 8 years ago, the voters allowed us to have a tech levy. So we actually have a really robust infrastructure in place with 20,000 iPads, one for each student. trained technicians, and the teachers had experience with technology before the pandemic hit. Well, we still needed to go out and buy, with ARPA funding, over 1,000 hotspots to distribute to try to make sure they had connectivity of some sort for most people. But prior to that, they were actually driving into our parking lots and trying to steal the signal from the buildings. And obviously, we were paying for the service as well. So there is still a problem. Probably our district is 202 square miles. Probably the southern 100 square miles has either non-existent or very poor connectivity. And I've talked to our tech folks out here. If we were to, we're willing to actually build a cell-based WAN, wide area network, to serve our kids and families in this area. It costs about $4 million, probably $300,000 a year to operate and maintain it. And we could have it operating in about 6 months. And it would allow us to have cell-based wideband access for, if you wanted to limit it just to the kids and their homework, that sort of thing, that level of instruction, that's fine, or it can be expanded. But we're willing to do our part to try to help to make sure that everybody has access to what is really a utility now. It's no longer a luxury. And it certainly, if you simply want to know what the kids' grades are, you need to go online to find out. We're at that level. And so we're willing to do our part in whatever way we can do to expand coverage and to improve coverage to at least 25 megabits for kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Siegel. We appreciate it. And so, Senator, you can see the impact that this is having in Pierce County, and we just appreciate your efforts.
Yeah, well, thank you all. It's just so impressive. This is a large, complex issue. It's not just simply get broadband to a home, which is complex in itself, but also making sure people have the skills they need to use it. And you talked about it from soup to nuts, and I know you are all really concentrated on making sure that this becomes an issue that Pierce County is really working on. I'm so happy to be a part of this, getting federal funds for you on all aspects of this, but it really comes from your local community, Derek, focusing on a need that you see that is going to make a difference in the lives of everyone, from those young kids in school, the senior citizens, and everybody in between. So I am delighted to hear how you're using this, and really looking forward to continuing to be a partner with you. So thank you very much.
And I'll just